Hello, students, teachers, and our esteemed guest. I welcome you all for this event on the occasion of International Girl Child's Day. We have organized a webinar on an important issue, that is child trafficking. Indeed, it is a crucial issue for city like Mumbai. And to discuss this issue, we have invited a team of experts who have a good first-hand experience to deal with the issue. The NGO Prerna. It is very interesting to know that Prerna has been active in this field for more than 3 decades now. That is, they are working with the sex workers from the first generation. They have done with it, and now they are working with the second generation of the sex workers. They work with prostitute women, commercial sex trade, and trafficking. There have been path-breaking success out uh, out of each intervention they have done in the community. Prerna has reached out to over 1,000 children through its night care center program. It shelters 300 plus children on any given night. Four night care centers located in the midst of red lighted areas. Prerna has a total of 8 programs on all counts: night care center program, educational support program, institutional placement program, now Nihal program, children's program for girl in need of care and protection, aftercare, anti-trafficking center, Sanman and Aramb. I'm glad to welcome the strong pillars of this NGO, Dr. Praveen Patkar, the co-founder and the director of the NGO, uh, Miss Kashina Karim, assistant director. She has helped in the coordinating and organizing this event. Then Miss Rashmi Taylor, casework manager. Uh, I'm so happy, and I once again welcome you all and hand over this program to our esteemed guest to take it forward. Thanks a lot. Indeed, it is a crucial issue for city like Mumbai. And to discuss this issue,
Sir,
we have
you
invited.
are on mute. Dr. Patkar, you're on mute.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Uh,
do we start?
yes, yes.
Okay, great. Students, we are very happy to meet you. Welcome to the program. And let's hope that we have coming up an hour and a half interaction or an hours of interaction with you, very fruitful. And let's get going with that. Today's our purpose is to understand what is human trafficking and what are the important features of human trafficking, what are the types of human trafficking, and what is happening about human trafficking, specifically focusing on child trafficking. Let, let that be the focus, and we shall have some kind of a general presentation for some 40-45 minutes or so, and the remaining time we shall keep for question and answers, so we can be more focused at answering your questions then. Uh, Coming to this human trafficking thing, very often trafficking, once we say trafficking, the general traffic problem of Mumbai comes before our eyes. The vehicles jammed and the signals not turning green all the time. No, but this human trafficking is a little different from that, rather quite different from that. There was time when human beings used to be marketed, bought and sold and auctioned as slaves, and they would be transported through vessels, ships, and therefore their movement, as if they were some kind of a commodity, and they were to be shipped by the transport system, actually got the title trafficking. But let us try to understand what is human trafficking. We have one way of approaching this. Either we say what it is not, and then we try to understand what it is. So let us first try to understand what is human trafficking not, or what is not human trafficking. Although it is very common for people to mistakenly conflate or equate human trafficking with something it is not. It is the same thing as prostitution. It is not the same thing as prostitution, sex trade, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, child labor, circus, or labor exploitation like bonded labor, surrogacy, or organ trade. There are several such things which are generally considered as equivalent of human trafficking, but they are not human trafficking. They are related to human trafficking, but by itself it is not human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the act of receiving, procuring, inducing, harboring, transporting, transferring, buying, selling, pledging, pawning, leasing of human beings deceitfully, wrongfully, unethically, criminally, using criminal unethical means such as taking undue advantage of the individual's vulnerability, force, fraud, deception, coercion, by abusing our power over another person, by abusing the vulnerability of the person, by giving money and getting consent to be exploited. Though all these ways essentially so that they can be put into some kind of a exploited lifestyle, some kind of an exploited lifestyle from where someone else will gain, someone else other than the victim will gain. So we see there are three things happening. There is an act of receiving, procuring, transferring, transporting, harboring human beings. Then there is that component of manner or component of the means which are used to transport people, to harbor people, to procure people, to receive people, buy people. And these are buying, selling, pledging, pawning, leasing, taking undue advantage of the person's vulnerability, uh, giving some incentive, showing some incentive, misinforming the person, frauding, deceiving. All these are the means. And then there's the final thing, that is the purpose of human trafficking. And the purpose of human trafficking is to put that person into some exploited lifestyle such as prostitution, pornography, sex tourism, labor, bonded labor, peonage, attached labor, indentured labor, uh, or taking their organs such as kidney, liver, skin, blood products, blood, all of that, so that it can be sold. So ultimately the final end or the destination is the exploited life for that person, for someone else's gain, not for the gain of the victim. The act, the means, and the last thing, purpose. These three things together decide what is human trafficking. Okay. But very often human trafficking is equated with smuggling. So you will very often you will come across the word manavi taskari or human smuggling. It is not smuggling. In smuggling, you have goods which are actually taken from one country to another country into the territory of another country by evading, by violating the customs related duty and laws. Similarly, human beings are also transported across the boundaries by evading immigration related and passport related laws. But that is human smuggling, because many times people like to pay to the agent to get themselves transferred, get themselves taken across the border by bribing the border officials, by bribing the police, by paying money to the agent, by traveling through containers, by traveling to airplanes, by traveling to rail, or by walking through land routes. In a variety of ways, people get themselves crossed across the border. That is what we call as human smuggling, where there is some kind of an element of voluntariness, and every kind of human smuggling may not result in exploitation. It may result into the person getting a better job. So we hear about so many people coming from South America entering in USA mainland. Very often we see that happening because they think that USA is a land of opportunity, and once we go there, everything will be set for us. It does happen also, considering from where they come. It does definitely help them in getting a better kind of a lifestyle or a better job opportunities, surely. But that is human smuggling. That is not the same thing, and therefore the word manavi taskari or human smuggling may not be the right word for that. Similarly, it is not illegal immigration. By violating passport rules, by violating immigration rules and laws, entering into another country's territory is illegal migration. Going with papers and passport and everything is migration. But that is not the same thing as human trafficking, because human trafficking is crossing the borders of district, village, uh, state, or nations and states all. But sometimes it may not cross the border. You can just be the same place, but you can be put into exploitative lifestyle. So therefore, there is a word called transfer, not transportation all the time. So human trafficking generally means that there is a purpose behind taking that person. That purpose is not shared with the person who is actually transferred according and ultimately the person is to be exploited so that somebody can make profit out of that person. So these three elements are to be remembered all the time in understanding human trafficking as a word and as a phenomenon. And it is different from human smuggling, we said. It is different from illegal migration, we said. It is not the same thing as prostitution, sex trade, bonded labor, or organ trade. So I'll just stop here and we shall try to understand what are the different types of human trafficking. Most of us know human trafficking as for sex trade, that is for prostitution purposes. But sex trade itself is so diversified these days, so that you have prostitution as it happens in a conventional manner in the red light areas or outside of the red light areas. But at the same time, there is sex tourism where people from abroad, people from outside come and visit certain areas, mainly tourism areas where they can invite local girls for sexual purposes. Then there is pornography making. Then there is kind of a suggestive erotic dancing, lap dancing, or any such kind of other explicit dancing. uh, Now these are the various ways the sex trade operates. And like trafficking takes place for this purpose, that is the sex trade. So sex trade becomes the destination of human trafficking, not trafficking in itself. And human trafficking has a purpose, and the purpose is the destination. So one of the destinations we saw is sex trade. The second definition we would see is labor exploitation. As we say, a number of Chinese labor are found put in containers, which are when opened in the beaches of the coast of Florida or some other states. Police have found out people dead because of suffocation, because of inhaling carbon dioxide in closed containers and traveling over the sea for 20-25 days in that condition. So people are desperate to get into places where there are job opportunities. People are given wrong impressions and they are told, girls are told that they will get a job in film industry, Bollywood, or they can make a career in modeling or something like that. Children are told that they will get decent jobs, and parents give away their children to the agents, whereby the children can then be made to work in a variety of industries, variety of establishment activities, mainly such as bag making, zardori ka work hai, then construction material, brick making, glass factories, mica mining. Mica is used for cosmetics. The kind of makeup that we use shines basically because there is mica, and that mica extraction in mines is generally done by children who are trafficked there. So these are the various destinations. Then there is trafficking in supply chain. For example, when we have chocolates, the chocolate is made from cocoa, and the cocoa gardening and farming is largely done by children who have been kidnapped and who have been placed there forcibly. You may have seen Blood Diamond movie, and that's a fact. In many countries, diamond quarrying or diamond mining is done by children, and children are used as soldiers with guns in their hands. Then there is yet another type of human trafficking that is made for the purposes of organ trade, where I just mentioned that your kidneys are taken away, skin is taken away, blood is taken away, or part of liver is taken away and sold to in the market. There is something very interesting that is related to sex tourism, and that is male bride. States which have a problem of adverse sex ratio with very few women and more men have a problem of getting brides, and therefore they go and purchase women from other parts of the country and they bring them as wives. But these are not wives, these are women who are kept for sexual exploitation purposes. They are there for doing all the kind of work in the house and in the farm without any kind of payment. They don't have rights as of wives, and their children also are not considered as legitimate children. But this happens. We have heard about stories about people coming from Middle East and Gulf countries coming down to Hyderabad and working out some kind of a temporary marriage that lasts for anything from 2 minutes, 5 minutes to 1 day to 3 days, 4 days, where they basically do that so as to circumvent the legal provisions against prostitution. So they can show that these are their wives, they use them sexually and drop them here and go away. So there is this system called muta marriage, and that is very prevalent in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana state now. So that is also where you find human trafficking is happening. What is something that is newly happening is there is a widespread surrogacy, and recently it has been banned, but it was operating in India for a very long time. In a surreptitious condition, surrogacy happens. Surrogacy is a woman is paid or woman is influenced so as to lend her reproductive system for somebody else to have their babies. So it's a kind of a baby farming, and women who are needy, who are in desperate conditions, are used for these purposes at a nominal amount, and their bodies and their reproductive systems are used again and again to get new children, which can be then used by couples who do not get children, or by agents who want to sell such children to such childless couples. And that is something that is growing, and there were cases in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat and other places also. So these are the various destinations which are generally used for human trafficking. So we saw that there are crimes, there are lifestyles of exploitation for which people are procured and supplied, and by using fraud, deception, coercion, and a variety of unethical ways, where people hope that they will get a good job, they will improve their career, and with that kind of innocence, they agree to go with the agent, and finally they land up in a place where there is nothing but exploitation, and from there is no rescue possible. Who are these victims? These victims are of, when we see the entire range of human trafficking, we would also realize that there are different types of victims for different types of trafficking purposes, or the destination crime. These two are linked together, and henceforth we shall consider them together. But initially we have seen the difference between the two terms. What is the destination crime, like prostitution, bondage labor, organ trade, and what is trafficking, that is getting people for such kinds of destinations. Now let us try to understand, by putting all of these things together, we come to the understanding that victims can be of any age, any sex, any nationality, any economic status, any religion, any political system, any political ideology, or they could be poor, they could be rich, they could belong to any kind of continent. So victims are those people who are vulnerable, who can be exploited without much risk. And we see that in most of the cases, women and children who are supportless, who come from lower class, who come from lower caste, who are unorganized, who do not have political organization to support them, who do not have land and other productive assets, who do not have employability. Their skills, if marketing skills are very poor, their employability skills are missing or very poor. Now such kinds of people, or people who have gone through difficult agricultural depression, industrial depression, lockdowns, disasters, natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, and therefore they have lost their family, the family is disintegrated, or that there are people who, such as abusive father, abusive husband, jobless father, alcoholic father, things like that. And then also differently abled people. So largely across the continents, we see that women and children who are very weak and come from such kind of underprivileged background happen to be the victims. But uh, it has been seen that although there could be exceptionally, there could be some kind of victims from richer countries also, but the overall proportion is very negligible. By and large, people from poorer countries and poorer strata of society, those who are facing certain personal mishaps, those who are going through some kind of war situation, ethnic cleansing, communal riots, or agricultural industrial depression, or things like that, they happen to be vulnerable to human trafficking, and the traffickers know where to look for them. This is about the victims. What happens to the victims? Very often, the damage that happens to the victims is irreversible. Imagine a 13-year, 14-year-old girl who wants to take up a job in the city of Bombay or Delhi. She is ready to work very hard. She wants to earn honest money and keep something for herself and send the rest by remittances and by money orders to her parents, so that the family can also live. She is doing nothing wrong. And if she in her own ways, in her own capacity, tries to find out what are the safer options to go to Bombay or Delhi and get work, and if somebody convinces her in good words by saying that yes, I will take the responsibility, this is my organization, this is my letterhead, I'll take you to Bombay and I'll put you in a factory like this, I keep doing that every now and then, you pay me some amount and I'll get you done. There is nothing wrong, there is nothing unnatural or wrong on the part of that girl to trust such kind of an offer and go with that person. It happens. Now in such cases, they realize that they land up in a brothel, forced for prostitution, raped, tortured every day, kept hungry, starved for several days, and ultimately broken into agreeing to prostitute there. They are put in various labor related activities, and there also they realize that there is no control on the working conditions, there are no working hours, there are no labor law, there is no labor law protection, there are no minimum wages, or there is no payment at all, and you just get 2 meals a day. And that is something that we had seen happening in Mumbai. In places like Govandi, we had seen several cases where children were kept there, made them to work for 12 to 13 hours in a day, not to leave the place, only for making the dresses, which generally we see used in the Saas Bahu serial on television. Those shiny dresses and the cosmetics that are used by the television industry that we see, and which is very common here. These are the places where the children have to work 14, 15 hours. We have seen that in bidi making factories in Kolkata, Bengal, and other places also. So the impact wise, you realize that there is labor exploitation, physical exploitation, there is psychological damage, there is physical damage. Very often the children who are put and the women who are put to prostitution happen to contract the deadly virus of HIV, for which there is no cure. And then they die at an early age. They live a life of stigma and discrimination. Although it is not their mistake, they are ostracized or abandoned by their parents, and they find no way to go back home, because the parents think that the villagers will not like it and the neighbors will not allow it, and we will have a tough problem, and the other family members will also share the stigma, and their own marriages will suffer. As a result, ultimately a person who is actually victimized for no fault on her part is further re-victimized by all these kinds of faulty social conventions and customs. Many times this damage that we have seen is irreversible damage, and very often because of HIV it is fatal damage, and it only ends into the death of the person. So the impact is cultural, because you cannot go back to your society and live like any other member of the society. The impact is political, because very often you are brought and taken away all your documents such as passport and citizenship records and things like that, whereby you cannot establish and the place where you are brought, you have no document to prove who you are. As a result, you do not have the political membership of that area. As a result, you have a political loss, you have a psychological loss, you have economic loss, you have physical loss, you are sexually lost, you are thoroughly damaged, and sometimes this damage is fatal. We shall briefly see, because naturally the question will be, if so much is happening, isn't there law? What is the police doing? What is the government doing? Well, yes, there are laws. The laws were in coal-free storage for almost 50 years. And although the law was against this specifically was the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, called ITPA or PETA, that was first enforced in the year 1956, and till the year 2000 it was very rarely used, and whenever it was used against the victim itself and not against the brothel keepers and pimps. Okay, so there is a provision in the Indian Penal Code, which is the principal criminal law of the country, made in 1960 and revised from time to time. The provision came in the year 2013, which is a very specific definition of what is trafficking. Although we spoke of trafficking, there was no such term trafficking in the book of law, and that was introduced in the year 2013 through criminal amendment bill, which came after the Nirbhaya case. And now there is a definition which says that whatever we have discussed in the beginning of this presentation, whatever I mentioned to you, the acts, means, and end product, it is something that is very properly articulated in this definition, which came from the United Nations, and with slight modification we have inserted that in our Indian Penal Code. So the Immoral Traffic Act was passed in 1956 but rarely used. What are the provisions of the Immoral Traffic Act? And today we can say that yes, in many parts of the country, the police has taken it up very seriously. The prosecution has taken it up very seriously. The judiciary is looking after it very seriously. So there is a hope today. But what are the main provisions of the Immoral Traffic Act? Let me just count them one by one. It defines prostitution as exploitation. In the past, prostitution was defined as sale of sex by a female, her bodily sex by a female, as if she was doing it voluntarily and all by herself. But prostitution was defined differently in the year 1986, which is very good. It is essentially considered as commercial exploitation of another person. So it is inherently defined as inherently exploitative activity. What are the offenses? Well, brothel keeping is an offense, running of a brothel, managing a brothel, giving one's own land or premise or establishment for somebody else to run a brothel is a crime. Leaving, then there is section 4 that is about pimping. We always hear the name dalal or dallas and pimps. What do the pimps do? Pimps have girls and they take commission on those girls by selling those girls temporarily to customers. So they find customers, they find a place and they supply the girl and take a part of the payment. And they control the girl physically like slaves. That is an offense under the law. The next offense is getting such girls, procuring them by a variety of means, so and then using them for the purpose of prostitution is a crime, section 5. Detaining them by taking away their clothes, taking away their money, by forcing them, by chaining them, by locking them, by taking away their documents, by keeping the documents with themselves, by taking away their passbooks, and thereby creating pressure whereby they cannot leave the place and go away, by threatening them that they will take action against them if they run away. So in a variety of ways, when somebody detains somebody so as to be used for the purpose of prostitution, that is a crime under section 6 of the Immoral Traffic Act. Then there is something called seducing somebody. If you are a person of authority, if you are a hostel warden, if you are a hospital dean, and you are using your influence, or you are a boss, you are a supervisor, and you are using your influence to influence the person working under you or in your custody to get into prostitution, that is also a punishable offense. And the law also makes provisions for non-offense, such as it equips the police with the power to conduct search operations, which are commonly called as raids. We generally commonly call raid, but it is in law it is called search. Then there is to rescue people who are found as apparently the victims in the given area, to take into possession people who are the offenders or who look like the offenders, and to send them to appropriate agencies for further processing under the law. There is also a provision that if any place is found used for the purpose of prostitution, it can be sealed temporarily. Of course, there is no provision to permanently close it down, and there is some amendment coming up around that subject also. But generally, these are the provisions. And the other law, that is the Criminal Procedure Act Code, also makes provisions for arrest, custody, taking of statements, conducting medical examinations. So the procedures which are required to actually carry out prosecution come under Code of Criminal Procedure. There are some better procedures which have been introduced recently in the year 2012 under the under the law commonly called as POCSO or POCSO Act. My colleague Kashina will tell us something more about POCSO and the other laws. Kashina?
Yes. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am quickly going to talk a little bit about the Protection of Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2012. So this particular act is specifically for offences, sexual offences that are taking place against children these days. Like Dr. Patkar was also mentioning before, these days we come across a lot of news items, that of sexual offences that are happening against girl children. So if they are under the age of 18, typically an FIR, which is a first information report, which is filed in the police station. When an FIR is filed in the police station, POCSO legislation or POCSO sections would be invoked in this first information report. If we look at the POCSO Act and analyze the POCSO Act in a little bit of a detail, we will realize that there are different kinds of offences under the POCSO Act. So right from penetrative sexual assault to aggravated penetrative sexual assault, which means that if it is that if a sexual assault is done on a child who is lower than a certain age, if it results to some kind of a physical or mental if it has a physical or mental impact on the particular child, or if the offense is being committed by someone who is in a position of trust, then those offenses become aggravated forms of sexual offenses. And there are grading punishments for all of these offenses which have been laid down in this particular legislation. Besides this, the POCSO Act, because it is a recent legislation, it came up only in the year 2012. It has certain provisions which are supposed to be child friendly, specifically for the process of prosecution and trial that happens in the court, so that the children are comfortable when this process is happening in the court of law. We also have the Juvenile Justice Act, Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. Juvenile Justice Act is largely a procedural legislation, and this is specifically for the rehabilitation of children in need of care and protection. We might come to a little bit of certain bodies that have been created under the Juvenile Justice Act, which we as citizens should be aware of. We will come to that maybe towards the end of this particular discussion. What we see is that child victims of sexual exploitation, both commercial sexual exploitation and non-commercial sexual exploitation, are rehabilitated through this law, under this law. So there are bodies under this particular legislation that look after the rehabilitation of these children, of course with a lot of support from civil society organizations and other stakeholders that have been created for the larger cause of child protection. Dr. Patkar, I think you can take up the Code of Criminal Procedure, the CRPC. You're on mute. I think we can.
Yeah, we won't go to, yeah, we can go to the next one.
Sure, sure.
Let's come back if there are technical specific issues.
Sure.
Yeah, this is very interesting. This is very interesting because many of you people sitting there and listening to this program will immediately are likely to ask that question. If that is so, and if that is not curable, and if there is so much of prostitution happening everywhere, and we are still dealing with it as if we are in the 17th century, what is the point? Why not we just allow them to function as like any other worker, and why not we just legalize prostitution? It's a very popular kind of a discussion and demand that let us legalize and get done forever. And see, the word legalization is so attractive and so appealing, like the word development. And in the name of development, so much destruction has been done in this country, but then still it is called development, and people like to support the idea of development. In the same manner, people like to support legalization, thinking that something lawful is going to happen, and therefore it must be good and should be supported. Let's try to understand what are the various policy approaches. There are some, it has been seen that all over the world over last 3-4 centuries, different countries have used different policies to deal with sex trade or prostitution trade. The most comprehensive after the Martin Luther King's abolition movement against black slavery, there was Josephine Butler's movement of abolition of white slavery. And white slavery, by white slavery I mean the slavery of slavery of women in prostitution in England and other European countries. These women were white, and therefore it was called white slavery. And there was a movement from the 1850s, 60s onwards, the abolitionist movement, which tried to do away with that by saying that prostitution is against the dignity of women, against the freedom of women. It is essentially exploitative, and it is essentially violent process. And women are in prostitution basically because they have no choice in life. They were given very little option, and they were controlled by the male society. As a result, they need to be, the system has to be abolished completely, no compromise. So there is one approach many countries take, and that of abolition. There is another approach that many countries take is to repression. So whenever they find prostitution related people, whether pimps, whether procurers, whether traffickers, whether brothel keepers, brothel managers, or customers, just punish them. get them wherever they can, punish them, and let everything be controlled by repressing that activity. Very often it has been seen that repression results into the activity going underground and not getting reduced. Nowhere in the world repression has caused reduction or disappearance of prostitution trade. It has only made it underground and therefore more exploitative, because what is happening underground, the government cannot reach out to that place, and people who want to help these women also cannot reach out to them, because everything takes a disguise form. Then there is something called toleration. So for the sake of the international image, the country may pass a law or policy against prostitution, but actually not operate it, because it is governed by some misunderstanding, such as it is a very essential thing for the society. If we go against prostitution, there will be rapes all over in the country. So if women are to be protected, some women have to be put into prostitution. So there are such kinds of funny ideas and very indecent ideas that support prostitution, and people and states take that kind of a position, that since there is a fear in touching this very sensitive subject, let us tolerate it, but let us keep it under the carpet. So once again, it is like allowing it to take place, and that is what India did. Passed the law in 1956, but did not implement it till the year 2000. Then there is something called regulation. They say, okay, we can't control it, let it go. Let us not bother about it, let them work, but just work under certain types of conditions. What are those conditions? Well, we will give them some hours, we will ask them to come for some kind of a regular medical checkup, we'll try to keep them clean of sexually transmitted infections, and we shall give them zones or areas where they will be active. And that is how the red light areas of India were created by the British under two laws, because there were sailors and soldiers, British, who used to come and who wanted women when they would be here in India, and that is the time under the law these brothels were created. So this is the regulation activity. What we have seen is legalization. These days people talk about legalization, and which involves licensing, registration, and zoning. Then there is something called encouragement policy, that is make money out of it. And there are several research studies which are trying to, there are several demands which are trying to say that it is like any other activity, government can start taxing them and use that money for controlling the business properly. So these are the broad policy approaches, and different countries have tried different approaches at different times, but most of them have failed. And they have also given rise to newer problems and newer movements against those laws. I'll stop here.
We will come to the institutionalized forms of sex trafficking. I think when Dr. Patkar was speaking about the types of trafficking, he mentioned about the institutionalized forms of sex trafficking specifically. So some practices of human trafficking have been carried out since generations, and these are particularly linked with certain religious or cultural based symbols or traditions into the society. These are particular practices that may not be perceived by the state or the society as to their as if they are anything objectionable or criminal, which is why we say that these are extremely well-oiled systems, and which is why they are referred to as institutionalized forms of sex trafficking, because they've been ongoing since generations together now. There are two specific examples that could be helpful to understand the institutionalized forms of sex trafficking that we're speaking about here. One is the trafficking of young girls through the Devdasi tradition. So if we try and understand the Devdasi tradition, the Devdasis, which are young girls, they used to be dedicated in the name of God, and subsequently were pushed into the sex trade. This is one form of trafficking that we see is rampant towards the southern parts of southern states of India. So you see this within Karnataka and in certain parts of Maharashtra as well. We have another form of institutionalized trafficking where girls from the Banchara, Bedia, Nut and Rajnat communities, which basically are present in the northwestern belt of India, are trafficked into the sex trade. So initially, most of these girls, as soon as they hit puberty, might be brought to metropolitan cities under the pretext of dancing in the dance bars, but eventually are sold into the sex trade. Um, The biggest challenge with these forms of institutionalized trafficking is that there is lack of explicit coercion. So the society does not see explicit coercion because this is something that has been practiced within the family since generations together. And there is no violence or bloodshed on the face of it that one sees, because of which it is legitimized and in some cases is also not considered as an offense of trafficking. Dr. Patkar, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, this is very interesting. For people, I don't know, the sex markets or the red light areas of India, all over India, were full of girls who were from the Devdasi belt. And it is very interesting to see that a girl could be dedicated into the Devdasi system before she started her monthly periods, before she started before menarche. They would be, once they start their periods, they would be ineligible to be dedicated. So imagine at what age girls used to be given away for the sex trade in the name of God, goddesses, deities and temples. And they would be actually, so majority of the sex trade in India was based on child trafficking. It was the sex trade based on children's sacrifices and victimization. That is something very important thing we have to understand. So when we talk about legalization, is it that we don't go to help them out and then give them the license to continue what they are in? Or it should be the responsibility of the state and the society to get them out of that place and give them some kind of an option. And that is the very important area of rehabilitation.
Rashmi, I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah.
So, as Kahina, she spoke about institutionalized trafficking and all. We thought that one common question that can arise is, does this happen in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, or any metropolitan cities as of now? So, I would like to talk to you, share a case about Ishika, who was a case referred to Prerna, and here the name has been changed. That is something that we should mention. That is done to maintain a confidentiality. So Ishika had entered the system when she was 17, the juvenile justice system when she was 17 years. So she was referred to us at that time. And she was referred to us as a case of missing child. So she ran away from home and a missing case was lodged against it. And it was after she was referred that we got, that the social workers began to interact with her. And that is how the various layers of the way she was trafficked unfolded. During our interaction with the child over a period of time, what we got to know was how she was trafficked into the system by where she was forced to dance in bars. She worked in a couple of dance bars, and from there, that is how she gradually began to solicit. She was forced to solicit for sexual services, and she was sent with customers at night time. And it was actually over a period of time that she shared that her parents were aware of this, and during the investigative process by the police, there were a couple of monetary transactions that were found, and when the social workers visited her family, her aunt's house and all, that is where we got to know that even her aunts were involved in dance bars. They were dancing in the bars, and one important thing that we got to know during the intervention was that when the social worker was talking to the child, she mentioned about her native place, and her native was she went back to the northwestern belt that Kashina earlier mentioned of, and that is where it unfolded that she was in fact a victim of institutionalized trafficking, and then over a period of time from dance bars she went on to being sexually exploited for commercial purposes. So this is something that is rampant even in Mumbai. It can be found anywhere. It is not that the issue of trafficking is limited to only village, city. It just goes across the boundaries of the geographical boundaries that we have established. Now, one question that arises is what happens after a minor is rescued? Can they be rehabilitated? Can a victim again recover? So initially what used to happen was the post-rescue system was not that strong. It was quite weak, which meant that the rehabilitation of a victim was not taken that seriously. So after a victim being rescued, there was a cycle that repeated, and again the victim might end up being re-trafficked because there was lack of resources. Children homes were not that equipped, and the investigative procedure was quite weak, because of which again there was no investigative processes involved in verification of documents. So if many times what used to happen is once a victim was rescued and there were claimants who would come and ask for their custody. So they would claim the child being either she's an adult, she's not a child, or they would produce fake documents, and because of no investigation happening, she would again be handed over to them uh, and returned to the trade. So over a period of time, what has happened is that these processes have in fact strengthened. So the incidents of re-trafficking have decreased considerably over a period of since the last 10 years. Now, if we talk about rehabilitation, what we can see is that during the due process, there's a due process that is followed before a child is handed over, or once the minute a child is rescued, a minor is rescued from a situation from an exploitative situation. So the services also include there's an important part where we involve the child in the process, and the child is an important stakeholder in it. The services are also around where legal assistance is provided. This legal assistance ranges from mediating between the police, the judiciary processes, the child, and the family if the family is not involved. Additionally, an important part is also the psychosocial assistance that is provided to the child. So there is a lot of awareness being created towards this issue recently, where mental health professionals provide the services to children. There's a lot of time that is gone in stabilizing the child and addressing the trauma that they have gone through. Additionally, if a minor victim enters the system and she wants to pursue an education ahead, so there is educational assistance provided where they are enrolled to a course enrolled to a course according to their age, and the follow-up mechanism then is continued till she completes it or till she reaches a milestone that she would want to achieve. Apart from this, there are a number of vocational training courses also that are looked into, where the victims are given opportunities to develop their skills and inculcate skills that they would like to, where they could get a financially viable job opportunity once they turn 18. So right from the beginning, they are oriented on that. And another important evolving system right now is something based around the family-based care, where it is recognized that the family is in fact an important component of an individual's life. Once the child turns 18, according to the Juvenile Justice Act, the child who turned an adult might want to go back to the family or might be put into an aftercare institution. So if the child is reintegrated to the family, it is very important for that system to be strong enough to develop a conducive system for the child's growth. So that is something where we work around, where the family also receives, where the family is provided with counseling and any other rehabilitative services, anything that the child might need and might need once she reaches back home. Kashina, sir, would you all want to add anything in this?
1 minute. Is that okay? See, maybe at a general level, what we need to understand is that it's very important to give confidence to the victims that this is not a one-way ticket. You can always come back. So rehabilitation is that return ticket to come back to the society and to lead yet another dignified life. See, as may not be able to go back to the same old life, but at least there is some kind of a dignified, self-reliant life possible, giving that. All these years, rehabilitation programs failed for the simple reason that there was no professional approach there. And therefore, there were no success stories there. But in the last 15 years, the voluntary sector in India has come up with such wonderful stories. And The approach was also very professional. The entire trade selection was very good, and there was a lot of investment made in the training of these girls to create employability and self-protective capabilities among them. Uh, can you imagine girls getting training in the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai? Can you imagine girls getting training in the Taj Lands Hotel in Mumbai or at Oberoi or at Trident? Well, the entire approach was kept a little different, and girls were, many corporate sector organizations came forward to give that kind of a facility right inside their own hotels. And we have girls now working in hospitality, in housekeeping, in catering technology, in beauty care, in upmarket fashion designing. We had ourselves conducted an 8 months to 10 months long duration program of upmarket fashion designing, and there are girls who are running their boutiques and working as skilled artists in the other boutique shops. So once you have that kind of an approach, you definitely come up with a success story. And I would say one more thing about rehabilitation, and that is, every time you don't have to rehabilitate the girl by giving her something. Now there are billions of people living in this country, and so many people living in the city of Bombay. Who has rehabilitated them? They find their own means and they live. The problem with this particular sector, is that the society doesn't allow them to live peacefully. It treats them with stigma and discrimination. It hounds them. As a result, a girl who wants to run her own activity peacefully will not be allowed to do that by the society. So what requires rehabilitation is the society's attitude, it's the society's way of working, it's the society's style of re-victimizing the victim rather than going after the culprits and the offenders. So you have to work in rehabilitation both the things: correct the social misperceptions whereby the treatment of stigma and discrimination will end, and cultivate proper perspective about this problem. And I would say that, let us adopt a policy of live and let live, and not bother these women, and they will be able to get rehabilitated very fast.
Exactly, sir. So I spoke about misconception of the society. The misperception definitely has to be corrected. So from your also, I would just like to share, like, we can't flash success stories as such due to, again, confidentiality, to protect the confidentiality. But there are a couple of in fact, a couple of cases that we have come across where children who were born to prostituted women, who are living in the red light area, say a decade back, they weren't even they faced discrimination in schools, because of which they couldn't retain their education. Now, over a period of time, what we have come across is that there are a number of cases, there are a number of children who are actually, they have retained education, they have completed the milestones, they have they've passed their 10th standard. We also have uh, individuals who have in fact gone ahead and they are pursuing their post graduation as well. So that's that itself is an important thing in this sector. If we talk about victims of trafficking, again, we have definitely come across girls who have, as said, that they have gone ahead, taken up courses on their own, and today they're skilled to run their own boutiques and other skill development opportunities that they have. From here, I think Kashina would now speak a little on the state support systems according to the JJ system that we had earlier mentioned about. Kashina?
Yes. Um, so typically when we actually conduct some of these awareness sessions or discussions with children and professionals to understand the issue of trafficking, and also to um, talk about measures that are available for rehabilitation and redressal, a lot of people actually ask us, what is it that we could be doing as individuals and as citizens? What are the things that we can do in this entire for this within this entire structure for rehabilitation and development? So largely what we are going to be talking for the next 2 to 3 minutes is going to be understanding what are the support systems that exist in the state today, which essentially means that if you come across any of these cases individually or through people that you know of, this is the information that you could be passing on to others as well. So if we understand the state support systems a bit, we initially spoke about the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. So if we look at that particular legislations, there are two bodies that have been created under that legislation. One is the Child Welfare Committee and one is the Juvenile Justice Board. The Juvenile Justice Board, of course, is dealing with children who have come in conflict with the law. But the children that we just mentioned about, who could be victims of sex trafficking themselves, typically come under the jurisdiction of the Child Welfare Committee. So ideally, each district should be having a Child Welfare Committee. So if we look at Bombay specifically, Bombay has 4 Child Welfare Committees because Bombay is divided into 2 separate districts, Mumbai city as well as Mumbai suburbs. Any citizen, any ordinary citizen can also go present a child before the CWC, or can present a case that where they think that the child might be vulnerable and might require care and protection before the Child Welfare Committee. Besides this, the Juvenile Justice Act has also created something called the Special Juvenile Police Units, SJPUs. Typically, every police station is supposed to have a child welfare police officer who is responsible for taking in complaints or any particular violations of children's rights within that particular jurisdiction. And the CWPOs, the child welfare police officers of each police stations, then make up the special juvenile police units. So anytime that one approaches a police station, they could ask for a child welfare police officer if there is any case that needs to be reported particularly or discussed when it comes to violation of children's rights. Rashmi, can we please go to the next slide? A further extension of the state support systems is the Childline Service. I'm sure most of you might have heard about this. So 1098 is typically a Childline helpline number. If you come across any child who you think is in distress or needs help or support, this is a number that we can call upon, and they will immediately try and resolve whatever complaint that you have against, whatever complaint that has been raised in terms of a violation of children's rights. Besides this, there are other helpline numbers as well, women helpline numbers, which have also been mentioned on this particular slide. So it's important that we are aware about this. So just in case something happens, or there is a time where we need to approach the state support systems, we are aware of what actually exists in the state. This is again an extension of what we were discussing just a couple of minutes ago in terms of how can ordinary citizens be helpful. One very important segment of how can one be helpful is to be aware. So sessions like this are of course extremely helpful, but it's also important that we talk about these issues with people and within our social circles, because people need to be aware that this is a social issue that exists even today. It exists in a city like Mumbai as well. So awareness is of course a key. You see throughout the slides, you must have seen that there is a website that has been flashed, that name of a website, a URL that has been flashing on the bottom of the slide, which is fighttrafficking.org. There is a lot of information that we have generally relating to the issue of trafficking, also a bit of the best practices and some kind of ground level implementation work that we as an organization do. All of this is up on this particular website. So any information, right from some questions about the issue to kind of to the practices that exist on the field, can be found on this particular website. So we've largely covered awareness, understanding the cause, and spreading information. It's important that we spread the information that we are receiving today in the form of a webinar, or subsequently if you go through or read about the issue, it's important that people around you within your immediate and extended circles also get to know about these particular issues. Supporting local organizations again is extremely essential. Like Prerna, there are a lot of other organizations that have been working for children's rights since decades now. It's important that where we stay or the area that we are around, we know of these local organizations, we know that they exist, and we can support them in any way possible. When we talk about support, please make a note of it that we do not always mean financial support. It could be any kind of support that one could be extending to these local organizations. Similar is supporting CCIs or shelter homes. When we spoke about rehabilitation, a component of rehabilitation is where the victims are actually admitted and enrolled, in some cases for a shorter duration, in some cases for a relatively longer duration. It's important that these childcare institutions or these shelter homes receive the kind of support from individual donors and from people across the spectrum. So this is a little bit to just talk about how can we as ordinary citizens be of help. We wanted to take a couple of questions, but I understand that we've shot our time by about 5 minutes. Do we still have time to take questions, Rohitji?
Indeed, madam. We will take a few questions.
Sure.
Okay. We have little worked our time more, but that was important. Great information. We are open for questions. Students who want to ask questions can directly put their questions, and the panel will answer it. Till the time, madam, students they gear up and they gather some confidence to shoot out their questions. Uh, I would like to talk about an issue which I have faced. Indeed, it is not about uh, child trafficking, but in Mumbai we see on the skywalk and at the beaches, we see that that women they have extended their business from red light areas to these local areas. After 8 o'clock in the evening, you see these roads, they are full of women, uh, even at the beaches. So how do we deal with it, and what is the solution? Why the government is not doing anything about it? Obviously, this was a pre-pandemic situation.
So do you want to take that up?
You can start. You want to answer?
No, I think you can take it up, and if there's
Okay.
anything Ashmi and me can add.
Okay, there are three dimensions to this issue. Number one is that these women are, many of them are actually under the pressure of the pimps and their brothel keepers. You know what happens is that when the brothels are full, there is place only for young girls because they are not to be allowed to go away because they will run away. So the brothel keepers create pressure on these women to stay away from the brothels and to look for customers by going onto the public street. So it has been a very old problem of cities like Bombay, where such kinds of adult women are thrown outside away from the brothels and red light areas to solicit. So they are under tremendous pressure, and if they don't come back with a customer, their jaws will be broken by their pimps. This is one very important dimension we have to understand. That's one. Number two, remember, is that there is nothing in the law that goes against a woman or a man selling her or his bodily sex to uh, a by a buyer. Okay, as long as they don't do it in public places, as long as they are away from any school or hospital or temple by 200 meters away. If they do that, it is not a crime, it is not an offense, and therefore the police can't do anything about it. Okay, so what is it that will be done? And number three is uh, so there is a possibility that the police can go around. That's precisely what police does. There is a clause in the law which has been implemented very heavily in the past, soliciting in public places, section 8, and that is where the women used to be arrested. They used to be produced before the magistrate, and they used to be fined. In the city of Bombay, they would be fined 1200 rupees. In a village area, district place, they would be charged 250 rupees. And that was a very standard procedure. Even today it happens. So if there are complaints, the police has to go there and see, because this is an area of conflict of interest. People living in the society have a right to decide what they should not be exposed to and what they consider as indecent behavior when they are moving away, going around with their family members. So it is legitimate that they take objection. And in such cases, there is a provision in the law that these women can be given an opportunity to acquire alternative skills and alternative livelihood, and so that they don't create this situation again. And there are people who are asking for places. They say that give certain zones so that these women will practice only in those zones, and that should not be illegal. But this is something very dynamic, and this is under consideration.
Thank you, sir. There are some questions waiting in the chat. Vipra madam, yes, Vipra madam, please
Yeah,
ask your question.
I think there is couple of questions from Facebook also. So I just wanted to ask you how, I mean, you talked about that you provide them with training and all that, the girls who get rescued, but what do you really, till how long do you look after them, or are you able to help them in getting back into mainstream or getting them married? Is there a facility, or is there a provision for that?
Krishna, you want to answer that?
Sure. So what if we talk specifically about an organization like Prerna assisting the state in the entire process of rehabilitation, typically what we see is the rehabilitation on the from the perspective of economic rehabilitation, which is something that eventually comes into the picture, comes at a later stage. If we understand the offense of trafficking and the severity of the offense and the impact of the offense on this particular victim, the immediate support that they require is in the form of mental health assistance. So typically that is where the journey of rehabilitation starts for the victim. So that's the kind of service that initially is provided to them. The victims, depending on how long they've been into the sex trade for, when were they trafficked, what was the condition in which they were during this entire ordeal, also matters a lot, because that is the time that they would require ideally to kind of stabilize post the rescue. Which is when some kind of productive activities on the lines of education or rehabilitation actually are initiated, and those kind of discussions are then taken up with most of these victims. The eventual goal of rehabilitation is, of course, economic rehabilitation, in a way that we want them to stand on their feet so that they can be reintegrated in that sense back into the society. Some of them do want to get married and start families and go on to that path as well. But when we understand rehabilitation, or when we look at rehabilitation particularly, we're not very keen on looking at marriage as an eventual aim of rehabilitation or social reintegration. So typically, even when we interact with a lot of these young girls who were rescued, who were children when they were rescued, but are going towards the path of becoming adults, so, and young adults as well, towards the ages of 18 to 21 to 24 as well, the discussion is almost always on the lines of getting them on their feet, and then subsequently thinking about whether they would want to get married or not. In certain cases, what we've also observed is that once the process of rehabilitation is kick-started, probably in a shelter facility or in a children's home particularly, some of them do want to go back to their families at some point in time. But they want to go back to their families at a stage where they have been, where they are empowered to an extent that they might be able to provide a little bit for the family, through earning, and B, that the family has a little bit of acceptance, in the sense that they let them do what they wish to do in terms of their livelihood as well. So yeah, that's largely what our experience particularly has been when it comes to rehabilitation and the eventual reintegration of the victims back into the society. Sir, is there anything that you want to add?
Yes, ma'am. There was a question, how is the transition of rescued children in the society? I think you have already answered it. there is a question about, do you think media is adding to misperceptions of society?
Yes. Dr. Patkar, do you want to take that one?
Madam, if you could reflect briefly and quickly, because there are some more
Absolutely.
questions lined up.
Yes. Sir, do you want to take that one? You're on mute.
Mute. Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Media has contributed both ways. There was media, like I must say that NDTV did a lot of work from the Bombay studio to actually get related to this issue and to give regular, proper and very professional kind of presentation of the problem as and when required. And there are others who are of course glorifying certain or misrepresenting or misprojecting the whole situation, strengthening the stereotypes of these women. I wouldn't say that they are doing it on purpose, but very often they are doing it without the knowledge of the reality and without also without understanding the impact that it makes on the society. So it's a kind of a mixed picture, I would say.
Okay, sir. Sir, there is an anonymous attendee who hasn't given the name, but she's asking, when you find a case of sex trafficking, say via a bar, what is the first step? So she is curious about what is the first step of entering into the business.
Into the business, I am not clear about the question.
A business of sex. She is referred to sex trafficking.
I think what they're trying to ask is, what is your first step in terms of reporting, if I'm not wrong? Is that what?
No, it's saying
Okay, I
about
don't
getting
know.
into the sex trade.
When you find a case of sex trafficking, say via a bar, what is your first step?
So
That is your first step.
yeah, as an organization, I think.
Because you have given an example of a girl
Yes,
who was in from a bar.
yes.
So what is your first step? That is what is she meant. If a student is there, can you question it yourself? Anyways, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes. Sir, do you want to take that one up, or should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So typically for an organization, if you ask if there is a case of sex trafficking that we come across, so we need to understand what kind of cases can we be reporting. So if this person is a minor or presumably looks like a minor, then of course this is a case that needs to be reported immediately. In the cases that we have come across, in instances that we've come across cases of sex trafficking in the red light area, particularly where if we come across a minor who we think is being commercially sexually exploited or is being pushed into the sex trade, we typically do two things. One is, like we mentioned, of the child welfare committee sometime back. So we get them into the loop because they have a mandate to look at issues around child protection. So they have a mandate even to take cognizance of cases that are not particularly produced before them. So involving them, and second is also involving the local police. So it's important that the local police along with the child welfare committee get involved. In certain cases, we've also included Childline. We mentioned of the 1098 Childline number. So 1098 is a Childline number, and Childline basically has implementing partners as per the districts. So in some cases, we might also involve the implementing partners to ensure that the child is safely rescued from this particular position and presented before the child welfare committee, who would then take further decisions in terms of the rehabilitation of the child.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. There is a question from one of the faculties from other department, that is HD department of our college. Ms. Shilpa Sawalake, one of the faculty of the college, is asking, do you receive threats when it comes to rescue? Do you receive threats from when it comes to rescue? Yes.
Not anymore. Maybe in the initial 5, 6, 10 years, we did receive, particularly working 24 hours inside a red light area of Bombay, which is generally known everywhere as a criminal hub, was definitely dangerous, and there used to be threats in the beginning, but not so much. I wouldn't unnecessarily glorify that part of it. There have not been really serious threats subsequently. In the last 10, 15 years, definitely not so many.
Okay. There is one more question. What do you do after initiating a conversation with someone to spread the word about this problem? What do you do after initiating a conversation with someone to spread the word about this problem? थोड़ा
I
सा फिर-
think this point was taken up by Kashina, that it is
Yeah.
very important that we should actually discuss this and create, try to remove social misperception, try to give the right type of perception that this woman, for example, we are walking together along the road and there is a girl standing there or a woman standing there. Obviously, you can infer that she is trying to solicit by her. And if you come to that conclusion, should you be looking at her as a kind of a criminal, an offender, or you should look at her as a victim? I think if you can look at her as a victim, our subsequent thinking process and action will also be accordingly changed. But if you look at her as an offender, as somebody who is doing it purposefully to create disturbances in the society, we would act also wrongly, and that wouldn't be a right thing for anybody. So maybe correcting social misperceptions, offering some kind of a help if it is possible.
Okay, so we will take this as a last question. There are many more coming, but we will have this as a last question, and then we will go for the conclusion of the program. What changes should a society go under so that victims can live a happy life and leave their trauma behind? How should they live a happy life? She's talking about rehabilitation.
I think society will have to stop the treatment of stigma and discrimination first and foremost. Very important. And also adopt a kind of, Bombay is that way very good as compared to many other cities, if I could be partial in my analysis, but or that I especially like Bombay. But Bombay is very tolerant, and I think this is something that we have to learn. Each person has problems, and people go through so many problems in life. We have to just have that compassion. We have to have that sensitivity. It is very important, and we have to have the right, the respect for the rights of these women and the children who are living with them. I think that is more important. That is the change that we need to do. We have to be more compassionate, more tolerant, and more respectful of their rights, and understand the social situation rather than let these mass media decide our behavior and perception.
Thanks a lot, sir. Now it's already 3:52. We will start winding the program. It was a great information, and it was a lot of new information came in. We never knew about a lot of things. I will request Bahuvya Kotian madam to propose a vote of thanks. Uh, Elton sir, Bahuvya madam is in the list of attendees. If she could be shifted to the panelist so that she could propose a vote of thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, madam. Bahuvya madam is one of our faculty members. She teaches photography to our students. Please, madam.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Rohit sir. So I would like to thank all of you, especially Ms. Kashina, Dr. Praveen, and Ms. Rashmi, for educating us and giving us such insights on such a sensitive and important issue. Thank you for your time and service towards this cause. And I would also like to thank Dr. Jagatmeet Madan, our principal, Ms. Manjari Balerao, our vice principal, Ms. Vibra Banerjee, our HOD, and Mr. Elton Pinto for the tech assistance. Without their support, I don't think we would have this event. And last of all, and equally important, I would like to thank all the participants to this conference for this discussion, for all the questions, and for actively participating. Thank you, everybody, for your presence.
And I would also like to thank Rohit Pawar. Dr. Pawar, you did a good job of connecting with the NGO, and what a wonderful session it was. So thank you so much for getting such a, experience, people who are into this, people who have experience of all this to come and speak to us and our students. It was indeed a wonderful session. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Very wonderful session. It was not possible without the support of Vipra madam. In fact, let me tell you that it was such a busy time for our college, but just to finalize the posters and all, okay. It was all because of the support of.
Internal, nothing great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would like to thank Mrs. Preeti Patkar because she initiated and I just called her with the reference from Google, and she, without any hesitation, she said yes. I am very, very thankful to her. I couldn't see her over here, but please convey my thanks to her.
Sure.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you so
And
much.
we will conclude the program.
Can I just add a few things? We would like to take this association further. I don't want to end this association with just one program from your end. We are a Department of Mass Communication and Extension, and students keep looking for NGOs who are working in the field. So when they have community outreach program and other activities, they will certainly get in touch with you, sir, Patkar sir, if it's that is okay. I will write to you formally. But I think it's a beginning of an association with all of you.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are welcome anytime. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for this wonderful opportunity. This was a good learning for us, and we always keep looking for such opportunities to create better awareness in the society. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.